Everyone makes the same joke. Stormtroopers can't shoot. White armor, fancy helmets, a whole galactic empire behind them, and they couldn't hit a moisture vaporator on Tatooine. The meme basically writes itself. Entire Reddit threads, YouTube compilations, novelty merchandise. Point a toy blaster at someone and say, "You're a stormtrooper," and everyone immediately knows you mean you're going to miss. The moment it stops being funny is the moment you actually look into why. Not the surface answer, bad writing, narrative convenience, but the structural answer, the in-universe mechanics, the doctrinal logic. Because the missed shots aren't random noise in the storytelling. They cluster in specific situations, produced by specific conditions, and at least one of the franchise's most famous miss sequences wasn't incompetence at all. It was a controlled operation with Vader and Tarkin's authorization. Once you know that, the comfortable laugh disappears, and something stranger takes its place. Start with the part most people skip. These aren't all the same soldiers. When Star Wars fans say stormtroopers can't aim, they're describing three completely different populations of soldiers across three completely different eras, as if the armor makes them identical. It doesn't. During the Clone Wars, the Republic's ground forces were clone troopers, soldiers grown on the cloning world of Kamino from the genetic template of the bounty hunter Jango Fett, trained from accelerated birth in purpose-built military doctrine. They weren't recruited or drafted. They were manufactured for this specific purpose. Their conditioning was deliberate, their battlefield training was consistent from the moment of growth, and their marksmanship reflected what happens when you engineer a soldier rather than enlist one. Clone troopers represent the closest thing the Star Wars galaxy ever produced to a purpose-built precision military force. They're the baseline, the thing that Imperial stormtroopers are always measured against, usually unfavorably. Then came Order 66. The Emperor consolidated power, the Republic became the Empire, and the clone program was wound down. What replaced those engineered soldiers were conscripted and volunteer humans, ordinary people recruited from across the galaxy, processed through Imperial training, and deployed under white helmets. This is verified canon, and the distinction matters enormously. The original trilogy stormtroopers aren't clones. That misconception is widespread enough that it's worth stating plainly. The soldiers firing at Luke, Han, and Leia in A New Hope are regular humans, not Jango Fett's genetic copies. You can't compare a purpose-engineered soldier trained from synthetic birth to someone who signed an enlistment form, dressed them in identical armor, and draw conclusions about some inherent stormtrooper quality. The armor is the same. The soldier inside it has been downgraded significantly. The First Order, decades later, tried a third approach entirely. Finn, designated FN-2187 before he defected, established in The Force Awakens that the First Order was kidnapping children and subjecting them to intensive psychological conditioning from an early age. No civilian life to remember, no competing loyalties, no identity outside the organization. The First Order's rationale was to correct exactly the weakness the Empire created by using conscripts. Soldiers who might think for themselves, might hesitate, might decide one day to lower their weapon on a burning village on Jakku. Conditioning children from their earliest years was supposed to eliminate that variable. Finn demonstrates that it didn't fully work. And the broader First Order action sequences in The Force Awakens suggest it didn't solve the accuracy problem either. 3 generations, 3 completely different recruitment and conditioning models. All 3 still produce soldiers who miss at rates that should get military commanders fired. Which is when the explanation has to look somewhere beyond individual soldier quality. Some of it's mechanical. The Stormtrooper helmet is a tactical asset and a visibility problem at the same time. The armor systems include environmental readouts, communications equipment, and targeting assistance, technology that should, in theory, work in the soldier's favor. In A New Hope, Luke Skywalker tries on Stormtrooper armor during the Death Star infiltration, and delivers what might be the most damning product review in cinema history. I can't see a thing in this helmet. That's not a complaint about the targeting software. That's a complaint about what the physical design does to peripheral vision, to depth perception, to the natural spatial awareness that trained shooters depend on. You can have functioning targeting systems and still be fighting your own equipment. Whether those systems are themselves defective is a separate claim, and one the Star Wars canon doesn't actually support. The theory that Stormtrooper HUDs are malfunctioning or overloaded with data circulates frequently in fan analysis, but no canonical source confirms it. The honest reading is a design tension. Targeting assistance is present, but the physical architecture of the helmet constrains the soldier trying to use it. Hardware working against hardware. Before pushing deeper into in-universe logic, there's a real-world layer worth placing here, because it provides necessary grounding, and then fails to explain enough. Military historian S.L.A. Marshall spent years studying American infantry behavior in combat, and documented something that surprised the military establishment. In active combat, a significant portion of soldiers either failed to fire their weapons at all, or fired so inaccurately as to be functionally non-contributing. His explanation was psychological, a deep inhibition against killing, present even in trained soldiers, that suppresses individual performance in ways no peacetime marksmanship score predicts. The noise, the chaos, the moral weight of the situation. Marshall's specific methodology has been scrutinized by later historians, but the phenomenon he identified became foundational to modern military thinking. The doctrine it generated was suppressive fire, the deliberate practice of pouring high-volume rounds downrange, not to hit specific targets, but to prevent the enemy from shooting back, while your own forces maneuver. Real combat firefights involve enormous ammunition expenditure for relatively few confirmed hits. The goal isn't precision. The goal is making the enemy keep their head down long enough for something else to work. The original Stormtroopers, the German World War I assault units from whom the Star Wars name is at minimum etymologically connected, built their entire tactical approach around exactly this. Suppressive fire used to achieve surprise and create chaos, not precision marksmanship. The fictional Stormtroopers carry that doctrinal heritage without most audiences ever noticing. They were never named precision marksmen. They were named after soldiers who won through volume, speed, and shock. Even granting all of that, psychological inhibition, suppressive fire doctrine, a helmet that fights its own user, the specific miss sequences in the Star Wars films are still statistically absurd, particularly one sequence that the galaxy has been misreading for nearly 50 years. The Millennium Falcon's escape from the Death Star in A New Hope runs for several minutes. Luke, Han, Leia, and Chewbacca fight through wave after wave of stormtroopers in narrow corridors and make it to the ship. Dozens of armed soldiers, close quarters, multiple firing opportunities. Nobody gets hit who wasn't supposed to get hit. Audiences have laughed at this since 1977. Rogue One, a Star Wars story, released in 2016, rewrote what that sequence means. Vader and Tarkin didn't try to stop the Millennium Falcon from leaving the Death Star. They allowed it to go. Deliberately. The plan was never to kill the fugitives on the hangar deck. It was to track the ship to the hidden rebel base, a location the Empire had been unable to extract through any other means. Tarkin confirms the tracking device is operational. The Falcon escapes not because the Empire's soldiers are incompetent, but because the two most powerful men in the Empire made a calculated decision that the rebel base was worth more than 4 dead prisoners in a corridor. Rogue One elevated this from fan theory and supplementary Legends material to hard film canon, confirmed, permanent continuity. The missed shots weren't missed, they were placed. Read the Death Star corridor sequence with that knowledge, and it transforms completely. Those stormtroopers weren't failing. They were performing, either operating under orders that filtered down to allow the targets to reach the ship, or kept deliberately uninformed while their commanders arranged the escape around them. The soldiers on that hangar deck may have believed they were trying. The institution they served had already decided how this would end. What looked like the most famous demonstration of Imperial incompetence was a controlled operation. The comedy was theater. And this is where the meme stops being weird and starts being something else entirely. Because if the most iconic Stormtrooper misfest in film history was deliberate, The rest of the franchise's missed shots require a different kind of examination. Cloud City on Bespin. Stormtroopers pursuing Han, Leia, and Chewbacca through those white-walled corridors, firing repeatedly, connecting rarely. The Battle of Endor on the Forest Moon, where rebel soldiers and Ewoks armed with rocks, slings, and logs somehow hold their own against an Imperial ground force equipped with AT-ST walkers and blaster rifles. Scout troopers outmaneuvered by creatures that hunt with spears. And then there's Boba Fett, the galaxy's most feared bounty hunter, a figure whose reputation towered over the original trilogy, undone at the Sarlacc pit when a barely recovered, still half-blind Han Solo accidentally triggered his jetpack. The most humiliating exit in franchise history. A man who inspired terror across the galaxy, killed by a fumble. The pattern doesn't belong to a single film, or a single planet, or a single faction. It recurs across every major engagement involving the principal characters, and it runs in both directions. Rebel soldiers miss constantly in these sequences too, and even the galaxy's legendary independence apparently can't convert when it counts. The shooting is poor across factions. That's not an Imperial failure, that's a universe-wide condition. The B-1 battle droids of the Separatist Army make the same point by parallel. Canonically described as flimsily designed and easy to destroy, and effective only in overwhelming numbers, B-1 droids aren't inaccurate because of Imperial doctrine. They predate the Empire by over a decade. Their design philosophy is identical. Volume compensates for individual ineffectiveness. The Separatists and the Empire, mortal enemies by every political measure, arrived at the exact same tactical conclusion independently. That suggests it's not a faction-specific choice. It may simply be the galaxy's default approach to fielding a mass army. Accept poor individual accuracy, deploy at overwhelming scale, and let the numbers do the work. The Imperial version of this philosophy is visible throughout the films in how stormtroopers are used and presented. They move in formations. They're deployed to occupy, to intimidate, to flood a space with armed presence. Their white armor creates visual uniformity and anonymity, a statement of institutional power rather than individual identity. Grand Moff Tarkin doesn't micromanage individual soldier accuracy because he doesn't need to. He commands a tide. The Empire can replace every stormtrooper it loses, indefinitely, across the galaxy. Whether any given soldier can shoot straight is, from the Empire's perspective, a secondary metric at best. The explicit claim that the Empire intentionally engineered individual inaccuracy into its troops overstates what the canon actually supports. What the films establish is an institution that structured itself around scale and fear, and tolerated accuracy loss as an acceptable trade-off for numerical dominance. The Empire didn't design bad shooters. It just never cared enough to fix them. Then there's the layer underneath all of this, the Force. Luke Skywalker is canonically Force-sensitive, and Force sensitivity is a property that bends probability across multiple decades of Star Wars storytelling. The Force has an observable will, expressed through the individuals most attuned to it, producing outcomes that shouldn't be statistically possible. A pilot who has never flown military combat fires his torpedoes down a narrow exhaust port at the conclusion of his first military engagement. Deactivated targeting computer. One chance. Obi-Wan's voice tells him the Force will guide the rest. It does. The popular theory that Han Solo is also passively Force-sensitive, that his legendary luck is the Force working through a non-Jedi, is appealing and genuinely widespread in fandom, but it's not canon. Han is explicitly non-Force sensitive in all verified canonical materials. His survival record is either extraordinary instinct, excellent luck, or the blunter fact that the story required him to live. But the Force argument doesn't need Han to be sensitive. It needs the Force to be operating on the environment around Force-sensitive characters, arranging probability, deflecting threats, ensuring that the individuals the Force has decided matter reach the moments they were built for. No canonical source explicitly states that Luke's Force sensitivity causes nearby stormtroopers to miss. That's an extrapolation, not established lore. but the broader Force philosophy gestures that direction. Obi-Wan describes it as an energy field binding the galaxy together, an active, organizing, willing phenomenon, a system that, when a key individual stands in a corridor full of armed soldiers, may simply tilt the odds in the direction the Force prefers. The heroes survive because the Force has determined they're not finished yet. Modern Star Wars has been testing what happens when you remove that protection. Rogue One, Andor, and The Mandalorian all represent a deliberate creative shift toward a Star Wars where blasters are lethal, cover is necessary, and soldiers on both sides die efficiently and quickly. Rogue One stormtroopers are measurably more dangerous than their original trilogy equivalents. They move in coordinated tactical formations. They communicate. They cut down rebel soldiers across the film's major engagements. The Battle of Scarif is genuinely costly for everyone involved. Rogue One proved the galaxy's soldiers are capable of accuracy when the story allows them to be. Andor pushed further. The corporate security forces, the Imperial garrisons, the ISB officers doing their methodical bureaucratic work. In Andor, the Empire is competent in ways it rarely is in the core saga films. Soldiers die from single shots. Firefights resolve quickly. The show is explicitly about what the rebellion actually cost in lives and attrition, and it can only tell that story if the weapons are real and the soldiers wielding them know how to use them. The Mandalorian works similarly. Cover is necessary. Beskar armor isn't magic. It's a fighting advantage in the universe where everything else shoots straight. The title character's gunfights carry physical weight that the original trilogy largely deferred. People get hit when they should. What this contrast reveals about the original trilogy is significant. Rogue One's competent stormtroopers don't contradict A New Hope's failing ones. They make the Death Star escape more suspicious. If these soldiers can shoot, and Rogue One proves they can, then the corridor sequence in A New Hope wasn't standard stormtrooper performance. It was exceptional stormtrooper performance, authorized at the highest levels of the Imperial command structure. The Rogue One stormtrooper and the A New Hope stormtrooper belong to the same institution operating under different instructions. One was allowed to fight. One was told to lose without knowing it. The 1997 special edition of A New Hope adds one small footnote. In the original 1977 theatrical cut, Han Solo shoots Greedo at the cantina table. Greedo doesn't fire. In the special edition, Greedo fires first and misses from a distance, where missing defies geometry. The Han shot first controversy has been running for nearly 30 years and doesn't require relitigating here. What's worth noting is the editorial instinct behind the change. Lucas's revision introduced a point-blank miss into a franchise already full of them, as if the universe's reflex was to protect the protagonist at any cost. The story required Greedo to miss, so he missed. The structure that emerges from all of this doesn't resolve cleanly, and it shouldn't. Three converging forces produce the galaxy's missed shots. First, generational degradation. The Empire replaced precision-engineered Camino soldiers with conscripts. Then the First Order replaced conscripts with conditioned children, accepting accuracy loss at each transition because scale was always the plan. Second, doctrinal indifference. Imperial military philosophy was built around volume, occupation, and fear, rather than individual lethality, making any given stormtrooper's accuracy a secondary metric the institution simply didn't optimize for. Third, and most consequentially, the Tarkin precedent. At the franchise's foundational moment, the galaxy's most powerful military demonstrated that its soldiers would be deliberately allowed to fail when the strategic calculus demanded it. Stormtroopers didn't lose the Death Star corridor sequence. The Empire decided to lose it. The soldiers on that hangar deck executed that decision without ever being told that was what they were doing. And underneath all of it, organizing the outcomes that doctrine and deliberate orders alone can't explain, is the Force. An active principle with observable preferences, expressed as probability across the entire history of the saga. The heroes survive encounter after encounter that should statistically kill them. The Force, in its more candid moments, tells Luke Skywalker when to fire and guides the shot home. The meme has always been about the miss. The story sitting underneath the meme is about who decided to miss, under what instructions, toward what end, and what it means that a universe has an organizing principle with strong opinions about who lives. The galaxy doesn't just tolerate incompetence. At its highest levels, it deploys incompetence as a tool, authorizes it as strategy, and underwrites it with something older than the Empire or the Rebellion, or any army that ever wore white armor and fired deliberately wide. That's the Force, and it's been running this operation from the beginning. Subscribe for more stories like this.